for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna dream.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I shall be sharing one of my favourite recipes for one of my favourite beer styles, the Belgian Blonde. When we think of Belgian beer, we often think of old traditional styles brewed by monks to bring money to their church or monastery. But in fact the Belgian Blonde has a relatively short history. In the 18th century the lager styles of beer took Europe by storm. To not be swept aside by this big change in the beer market, Belgian brewers had to get creative, and they began using Pilsner Malt in their recipes alongside our yeasts to create a new style that became the delightful and delicious Belgian Blonde Ale. These days there is so much crossover of styles that Belgian Blonde Ales almost blend in with Belgian triples and pale ales, the only thing really separating them being alcohol strength. The Belgian Blonde Ale sits proudly in the middle of Belgian Pale Ale and a triple. A great commercial example of this style in my opinion would be the Leffe Blonde. If you have never tried this beer, then I suggest you finish watching this video and then go out and get yourself 1 or 6 depending on how thirsty you are. My recipe and methods that I present to you here are not so far away in taste from a Leffe Blonde, but I have tweaked this over a period of quite some years to give you what I believe is the best taste profile. Give it a try and tell me what you think. The recipe I present in this video is for 12 litres. If you wish to convert this to a different amount and you are not sure how to do this, then please check out the video title that you can see on the screen now on my channel. This will take you through this very easy process. This recipe can be found in full within this video's description and also on the Grainfather Recipe Tools database. This recipe certainly creates some very interesting flavours given time. Do note that this is not one that will have a quick turnaround if you wish to enjoy it as intended. I have found in the past that this is a very nice beer after a few months, but keeps improving for up until 5 to 6 months, and then it becomes absolutely spectacular. This is why I am brewing it now in January with a view to actually drinking it during the summer. I wholeheartedly recommend the use of candy sugar in this recipe as listed, but if you do wish to use regular table sugar, then that is your choice. Let's pick up the brew at the very beginning where you can have a good look at that all-important grain crush. This is about right in terms of crush. Anything finer would be just simply too fine, and anything coarser will not give you the efficiency that we so desire. Skipping ahead on time now, and I have just added the last part of my grain. You will notice that it appears that we are short of liquid here. This is soon fixed however by breaking up the malt and stirring. This ends up about right, despite appearances to start with. The sink strainer that I add to the top filters out loose bits, and also acts as an alarm when too many form on top. This means your grain crush was way too fine. For those that need it, here is a pausable section in the video with more information about mashing. Pause now if this interests you. If not, then we will now move on. While I am waiting for my mash to finish, I actually start preparing all of my boil additions. In this recipe I've mentioned orange peel of 2 different types, sweet and bitter. These things can be found at local homebrew stores rather than your local supermarket. The coriander in this recipe can be found at your supermarket though. Just make sure you crush it before adding it as specified in my recipe. Here's a look at my wort during mash in. You can see that we have a beautiful colour developing here. Unlike some Belgian beers, this one has a simple mash schedule. Simply 70 degrees C for 60 minutes and 75 degrees C for 10 minutes. Please see the screen for imperial measurements. The high mash in temperature will ensure that different sugars are formed during the mash that will give this style the required head start to having a nice sweet edge to it. Because we are adding further fermentable sugars to this brew during the boil, this will transform it from having a heavy body into a light to medium bodied beer. Directly after our mash is finished, we then add our first wort hops. For those that are not familiar with this technique, the first wort hop addition is a bittering hop and is replacing the hop that you would normally add at the start of the boil. At one time, this was very commonly used practice. The end result is that you will arguably get a smoother level of bitterness. I say arguably because this is a much debated point. Personally, I prefer to stay out of the arguing, but suggest this method for this particular beer. It also means that in effect you use less hops than a standard addition. Some people use this method for all of their beers. I suggest you experiment and form your own opinion. We then move directly to our sparge, and this one was particularly steamy, as you can see here. For more information about the sparge, here is another pausable section. Pause now to read this text. After the sparge, I always clean my grain basket and start preparing my fermenter. The stage that you see here is me removing star sand from our conical fermenter back into the container for future use. Moving on to the boil now, and because this recipe is Pilsner Malt based, I am boiling for 90 minutes to drive off DMS. The longer boil ensures that the majority of this is boiled off as a vapour. DMS is also one of the reasons that we do not have a lid on while we boil. Should you leave the lid on, then your beer will taste like cooked corn. Naturally, it would also greatly increase the risk of boilovers. So definitely leave that lid off during the boil. Once you hit your boiling point, and of course depending on how close you are to sea level this will vary, it is then time to clear the head of the beer of this foam. This foam is basically protein. I start my boil timer once this is all cleared. The thing to do after this is cleared is give the bottom plate a quick scrape. Do this with the flat of your brewing spoon only to avoid scratching. Stirring in the foam is something to do as it develops, and scraping that bottom plate is something to do, I would say, a minimum of 3 times per brew. This recipe calls for the use of Belgian Candi sugar. The nature of this sugar is that it is in solid lumps. To avoid burning this, I advise the following. Break up your sugar into as small pieces as possible. Then add boiling hot wort to the sugar in a bowl and give it a good stir to start it dissolving. Add it to your system in one area as far away from your pump's filter as possible. Then stir the bottom to ensure all is melted and good. After this, give the brew a quick stir and scrape the bottom plate thoroughly. Because I will whirlpool at the end of every brew, I will also run boiling hot wort through the counterflow chiller before I reach the end of the boil to sanitize it. This can actually be done at any point. I would suggest that you do it before making any large hop additions. Because I find that this reduces my temperatures below boiling point, I pause the boil timer and resume it after this process is finished and my boil temperature is reached again. You only need to do this process for a few minutes for the full effect. 5 minutes before the end of the boil, we will be adding our orange peel and crushed coriander. It is absolutely vital to stir this all into your brew, making it all wet and separated. This will ensure that it adds the finishing flavours desired by the recipe. I do love the fantastic smell that you get from this orange peel. At 0 minutes, we will do our whirlpool. This is an important part of our process because not only will it free up our filter for easy cooling and transfer, but it will also give you a clearer wort, improved hop flavour and aroma, plus will reduce the threat of DMS. Using this Grainfather whirlpool and aeration paddle, I spend a couple of minutes drilling away and then I let it sit for 15 minutes before starting the cooling process. For those that need it, here is a quick text relating to the boiling process in general. Pause now to read this fully. During the cooling process, I use a Blickman thermometer to know the temperature of my wort in the counterflow chiller. I wait for the wort to be cooled to just above the desired temperature before starting the transfer of my wort into my fermenter. It's worth noting that Blichmann actually suggest against using liquids of this heat with their product, but I am way over 100 brews using this product in this way, and it is still working accurately. When I transfer from my Grainfather into my fermenter, I splash the wort in, which as you can see adds in some much desired oxygen already. I then use the Grainfather whirlpool and aeration paddle to add in even more oxygen. The end result of these methods is a healthy environment for your yeast to thrive in, with a total reduction in yeast lag time. This is of course very important because we don't want wild yeast to get hold of our beer before our intended yeast does. I've been doing some testing recently with the time to spend with aeration, and I've come to the conclusion that 5 minutes gives optimal results when you use this paddle for regular beers, but high gravity beers seem to benefit from longer periods of aeration. My go-to yeast for Belgian styles is the Mangrove Jack's Belgian Triple M31 yeast. For best results, this yeast should be used at between 18 to 28 degrees Celsius. My favourite fermentation schedule for this yeast for the best results is as follows. Days 1 to 7, 18 degrees C. If it does go above this by its own, let it do so, don't chill it back down. And then after that 7th day, start adding 1 degree C per day until you reach 25 degrees C. I have found that the attenuation rate suggested by the manufacturer is not quite right. 99% of my fermentations with this yeast go down to 1000 final gravity. Do note that Mangrove Jack's yeast sachets have recently had a redesign, so if you're buying a new packet of this, then it may not look like the one I showed before, but the one that you see on the screen now. I'm happy to say that I had a very successful brew day, and I have a confirmed starting gravity from this brew, which is just a couple of points above the prediction, so no issues there. It wasn't long actually before this one started doing some pretty vigorous fermentation, so that's also a very nice thing to see. Once this one has finished its fermentation, then I will be adding it to a carboy for bulk conditioning. The beer will stay like this until the summer. I will then bottle it after treating it to some fresh yeast for carbonation, or you never know, I might even have a spare keg for it. I have brewed this recipe many times over the decades, and it's one that I really enjoy. I've certainly made some tweaks along the way, so I hope you do too. Let me know what you think. This is certainly a fun brew, and I hope you have found this video to be useful, interesting and enjoyable. So if you did like this video, then please do like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I have always got a lot of new videos planned for the future, so if you are interested in seeing my new content, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I have covered in this video or any other video, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with me via YouTube or Facebook. I'm a member of pretty much every Grainfather Facebook group and more. Happy brewing!